Hello, today is August 8th, 2018. This is the kubeadm office hours for SIG cluster lifecycle. We have not a packed agenda, but we have stuff on there. So if there are other things that folks want to add to the agenda for today, please feel free to do so while we start to kick it off. Chuck, you have the first one. Let's close milestones unless there's a reason not to do so.
Just a couple of things I wanted to bring up to the group at large. So we've got milestones in the kubeadm issue tracker. I don't know if there's an existing policy on when we close those. Some are closed back to 1.8, I think, and 1.9 is still open. Should we just close those as those get released so we can close 1.9, 1.10, and 1.11?
I think we should close everything, but I think probably 1.11 should be closed now. Most of the things have been backported and we can deal with it as needed basis. I can run through that and quickly close the existing ones.
Okay, and then so that's going to be just whenever we pass that milestone, we can close the milestone.
Well, we typically do have like a couple tracker things that kind of languish around into the next release cycle.
Yeah.
So I think there's probably be like some timeout period once we're into the next cycle.
Yeah, like past 0.0 or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, cool. Okay, that sounds great. Thanks, Tim. And the second one was we've been seeing some unhappy users with regard to the changes in the Debian and Debian packages and RPM packages. Specifically, the problem is with the release repo and how we change the dependencies. So the release repo builds various versions of Kubernetes using the master version of the release repo. But we added the dependencies into master branch, so then any new 1.8 branch, 1.9 branch, 1.10 branch is all going to start pulling in those dependencies when it really shouldn't. So we're seeing some reports about that. I think, unfortunately, the fix here is just to do more version checking in the release repo. But I just wanted to bring this up to the group at large to let you know that this is probably going to be a problem.
Tim Pepper is not on this call. I don't know what the state of Bazel is still. I don't know there's no backlog that I can track that I've seen that somebody's maintaining. I think the problem with the SIG release group is that there is no one that's driving continuity across the releases. A lot of the times it's a volunteer group that once they've done it, they're like, peace out, I'm good.
Right.
I don't necessarily want to do this again. So as a result, there is no one tracking how to cross the milestone of getting Bazel builds into being the actual builds that we produce. I do know that we use it for all of our testing infrastructure. It's the long-term arc of this was like back in 1.9 was the original inception, and we were the only thing I knew that we were blocked on was multi-arch builds for certain architectures for Bazel.
Yep.
And I don't know where that landed. I don't know what the state of it is anymore.
There's still some issue with the CGO stuff too. Last time I tried it, I've tried to build cross-platform images on my machine, and not much luck there.
Cool.
So I don't know. There's two options. One is to fix it for reals, and two is to Band-Aid for the time being. So we can either Band-Aid, which is basically add the version checks to the release repository, or we can start to make a coalition of the willing to fix it for reals and try to actually get the arc of Bazel into production a little bit sooner.
I'm thinking, why not both in this case?
You could do both. I would ideally like, here's a question that I don't know the answer to. Maybe we can log it in the release repository.
Yeah.
Be like, let's close this repository, and here's the checklist for using Bazel for builds.
Yeah.
Seems like a reasonable-ish thing. I think maybe opening up a tracking issue with a checklist of all the discovery that we uncover, because I know that Tim is working hard to get Google out of the release blocker list. And I think some of the effort here to make the upstream KK repo be the canonical source of truth would help everybody to make this possible.
Yeah. Okay. I can start to talk to release and open up an issue.
I would talk specifically with Tim Pepper in the release group.
By the way, Tim Pepper can join us in 10 to 15 minutes. So if you have any questions for him.
Yep, I think we can probably, why don't we hold those questions then for a little bit and we can go on to other topics.
Okay.
So next topic is my general unhappiness with the CLI, the flags, and config issues that kind of exist. Ross, I saw your PR, and I'm trying really hard to find it. And I know Liz and I the group was talking about it yesterday, about trying to find a happy path forwards, because right now it's very kludgy and ad hoc how we deal with it across the different subcommands through to the config. And I would much prefer to have a clean story that is consistent, because I'm looking at two PRs right now. I'm looking at Ross's PR, and then I'm also looking at Peter's. And yay, Peter's back. So if you get a chance to say hi, please say hi to Peter. I don't exactly know what happened, but he is back, and he's been an awesome resource. So having a consistent theme for how we handle this inside of kubeadm, I think, matters a lot. I don't necessarily think we're going to find a clean solution in the CLI stuff or in other daemons yet. So I think we're kind of a little bit blazing the trail. But I do think that some of the other, there's precedent in a lot of other tooling to do this in a cleaner fashion. So I don't know if I want to just wait on this and table the conversation until, Liz, I know you said you wanted to write some stuff up and you wrote an issue for it. We can wait till that point, or if there are more things to discuss regarding it.
I've written up the issue, but that doesn't mean I have any particularly good ideas on how to solve it. We've gotten a couple comments on the issues, and they're all sort of a rehash of.
I think what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and think about this one, because I'm not happy with it, and the UX is weird. And between Ross's PR and Peter's PR, I don't want to have folks blocked on this problem, because they're doing things slightly differently in those PRs. And ideally, we just have consistency throughout the subcommands through to the config and make it abstracted away enough so that way it's just clean. Because it seems like it's very ad hoc at this point.
The PR from Peter is also a fix for the offline issues we are having.
It's two parts of the same coin. Yes, he has the version of like how do you set a default version, and Ross's PR is like how do I do flag overrides, which is all about like how does the input arg and defaults flow through to config, so it's clean throughout the execution of the other code when it's going through its phases, right?
So I've asked Jordan yesterday that why didn't they use the Viper or something like that for the kubelets, and I didn't get a response. But so they went for the manual way of doing it, and I don't think it's a good. Yeah.
Yeah, the kubelet is really old too. So like, don't forget like the problem with some of this stuff is that it was written when Go was still, it's 4 years old now, and a lot of the stuff has a legacy. So, and some of the legacy is folks were learning Go while they were building this stuff. A lot of them are old hat systems engineers, and like myself, and the transition was not very clean. So the best practices were not followed. You can see that in logging. You can see that in command line argument handling. You can see that in some of the other API machinery stuff. You see that factoring in the registry, yada, yada, yada. There's a lot of areas where you can see this in the code base. So I don't necessarily know if I would look to existing examples inside of the other processes inside the core as canonical source of truth. I think what I'll do is I'll poke around and try and poke around and talk with Liz and talk with Dave Cheney to see if there's like really good examples that exist for how to deal with this cleaner.
Or perhaps we can blaze the trail with Viper.
Well, I want to talk with Dave, what Dave's thoughts are with regards to Viper. I don't have strong feelings other than I know it's cleaner and I've used it, but I don't necessarily know if Dave has other tools in his arsenal that might be cleaner.
Yeah, we need to check what documentation options Viper provides, because Cobra has them, but
Viper's an extension of Cobra. Right?
Yeah, yeah. I'm just asking if there are like any caveats, so hopefully it works.
Okay, well, I'll follow up on that issue and try to talk with folks. Next up, Lubomir, you had the job board stuff.
Well, I'm not sure if this idea is going to be like solidified, but so Georgia came to the SIG and said that basically they're making something like a job board, but then the job idea was changed to like community work because we're not offering money for work, essentially. And the idea is to have like a list of tasks for users to be assigned to. Like if we have somebody who wants to work on documentation, we can like give him a job description. Or if somebody wants to babysit the end-to-end tests, we can also do that. But the idea here is to discuss like what sort of help do we need. So apart from these docs and end-to-end tests ideas, does anybody else have something?
I think those are the big ones that kind of fall down that are often missed. One thing that I think would be interesting for folks to explore the idea of, there's a ton of tooling that exists in the ecosystem, which is like 5,000 recipes that all do the same thing. It's like how do I stand up a cluster using kubeadm? Like it makes sense for the community to maybe have like something. I've posted a help wanted issue on our repository, but for someone to go through the existing community-wide stuff on GitHub to distill down like, here are some of the best canonical examples of a Terraform and Ansible based simplified recipe that anybody can we can maintain, and then anybody can just crib that stuff. So and build it as part of their tooling, because it's kind of ludicrous that there's like, I don't even know how many. I think last I looked, there was like 15 different kubeadm Ansible installers, and there were like dozens of Terraform examples for kubeadm. It'd be nice for us to have a canonical recipe that we maintain, so that we have as part of our testing too, and that we can just say like, here, just copy this stuff and go.
Yeah, that's definitely an option to add. I guess what action should we take in terms of documenting our like job descriptions? Do you think that we should use GitHub issue or Google Docs for this?
I think Google Docs right now, until they have like a template. Once they have a template, then it could be an issue, I guess. But maybe work with the Contribex folks on helping to get a template going makes a lot of sense. And we can revise that list to maybe start out with a document this week, and maybe next week we can discuss it.
Yeah, we don't have a template yet. So I have skepticism about this, but we're going to see how it works. So I'm going to assign a Google Doc to the issue we have already in the kubeadm repo specifically. Do you think that we should also do this for the cluster API?
We can. I'm not as informed of what they're trying to look for. I think we should talk with Robert and Chris Nova and ask them what they feel they need from a community help wanted sign. I kind of view this as like, I live in a university town, so there's like, if you walk down to the university, there's like help wanted things all over the place, or like little post-it boards. I kind of envision it kind of like that.
Okay, so I'm gonna basically create a couple of sections in the Google Doc for the cluster API for kubeadm. I guess with this job boards, they are trying to like move away from the help wanted and good first issue, because it seems that people are not checking those. But my problem with the board is that it's yet another platform to follow. We already have Slack, mailing lists, GitHub.
I'm not going to disagree with you. I don't know whether or not it's what I think we can just try it with a couple simple things and see what happens. And then if nothing happens, then don't pursue it any further. I do think from a community perspective, the job we started in early 110 into 111 that we're continuing in 112 of continuously triaging the backlog is super helpful for new contributors that want to get engaged. I've seen a number of PRs from folks I've never seen before who basically pick things up, but this is also we should also be a little more regimented and make sure that we spell out in detail, make sure our vernacular is clear about what we're trying to aim for. So there's a plus and minus. More people are watching, and they're executing autonomously. They're not necessarily part of the SIG, so make sure that when we write up our issues, it's very clean of what the expectations are. Because I know that there's a couple of PRs that came in, and we're kind of going through a little bit of a rough patch to clean it up, because what was written down in the issue was not fully formed. So the person implemented something that we have to go back and forth on a couple times.
Okay, I'm gonna create the doc later today.
Right. I have not heard any updates with regards to docs. Lubomir, have you talked with Jennifer at all?
So, yeah.
And the state is?
No. I thought that you were going to say something else. Basically, to my understanding, you can confirm that, I guess, better than me. She was away, or perhaps busy with something else the whole July. So right now, she didn't do any work with moving the docs. Basically, we have to move everything to the same folder. That was the main concern that we have. And perhaps I should talk to her and start the action myself, because I think that we have a lot of duplication, and the 112 deadline is going to come soon. And basically, that's what I'm proposing.
Okay, I can touch base with Jennifer before the week's done. I am going to be out for most of next week. So I already mentioned this with Robert, so he'll hopefully be around to run the show for a while. But I'll try to touch base with her and get an update to if there's any dangling things that need addressing. I do know that within our repository that we had talked about adding more documentation, but we haven't really done any of that, because we want to shed some of the intricacies and details from the main docs and just say, go over to developer docs if you care about these details.
Basically, the whole process needs a lot of decision making. So we still haven't decided on the target structure we want to have for the kubeadm docs. The overall consensus with Lucas and Jennifer last time was that we want to place everything into a setup folder, because kubeadm is mostly setup related, and the stuff that is related to the CLI should be into the reference folder. And if somebody gives me the green light, I can start merging docs and moving stuff around. But so Jennifer is a part of SIGDocs. I don't have a green light from her because she wanted to do some stuff by herself, I guess, to make the process more transparent in terms of SIGDocs. And also I need a green light from you, like, Lubomir, go ahead and start doing the work. So once we have the structure, we can start poking at the backlog and implementing stuff, because I don't want to have conflicts in terms of PRs if we start working on docs and then we have to move something because there's another PR that is moving stuff around.
Why don't I try to sync with Jennifer in the next couple of days, and I'll post details on the state in Slack.
Okay.
One thing I wanted to do too, I wanted to give a PSA reminder, I didn't have it in the notes today, is that the code freeze is a little under a month away. So that means any new feature development has to be in before that date. Only bug fixes will go in after that date. And I do know that there are some other work items that we wanted to get in that are pretty important. So the control plane join for getting into alpha. Then there is I did want to look at workflow refinement for the HA setup. It's possible that we can clean up even further some of the processes that is required for us to get to HA. And the config, sort of the entire document that Lucas laid out for config. One thing that's not clear to me is whether or not how much time Lucas will have to devote, because he's got PRs that are stuck on some of this, and whether or not we should try to take some of that stuff over and try to drive it through to fruition. Those are the big ones.
We should have spoke to Lucas yesterday when he was here to basically give permission from him, take permission from him to continue the PR work, because the one that separates the cluster configuration is quite blocking right now. I think it blocks like 2 or 3 PRs. So I can message him on Slack, but I'm not sure if he's going to reply today.
You can, if you PM him, he'll eventually get it. So that seems like a reasonable option. If we can unblock it, then we should try to rally and resource it, because that is arguably the most important one, to get those things in place. I don't know if we'll get to beta, but I would like to get as much of the changes in place as possible.
So about the beta, I don't know the policy of Kubernetes exactly here. So we have the config as a feature. So it's better if we supposedly have everything in place and only make minor fixes for GA. Is that correct? Everything.
Beta basically means it's that's very close. There's also a policy for how you change things. You have to go through a deprecation cycle, and it's got to go across 2 releases. So it's actually spelled out. I'd have to dig up the docs, but it is spelled out with how you're supposed to do things. So even right now, I wanted to get rid of the CLI flag for self-hosting, but I need to mark it as deprecated first. So
Yeah, I know about the flags. I'm just curious that if we decide to move stuff around or add new stuff to the beta config, then we basically have to go through a separate process for that.
It's not separate process, but I think for right now, the config and the restructuring has been beaten to death. We just need to do it. And it's gotten a lot of mileage and thought underneath it. And it is the core central blocker for some feature enablements, like you mentioned. So we just need to get it done. So if you can PM Lucas, or I can too, to see where he's at with that whip PR, I think we should try to rally and execute again, because there's a checklist that exists there. Fabrizio had created the original checklist, and once we get that that PR in place, then we can start to get the rest of the checklist done.
Okay, I can PM him later. Another quick question is about the. I talked to Peter about this. Like, is there a particular reason why kubeadm is not? For instance, there is a Kubernetes version by default when the user starts a kubeadm command, and is there a reason why not we are not using the one that comes from the CLI, basically from the binary, the version from the binary?
We always try to use, by default, this has always been the case, and Alexander can talk about some of the history there too, that it always tries to grab the latest version of the release that it was under from. So if it's 1.11, it'd be the late. It always try to go to the GCS bucket for the latest version for that release. I don't recall the entire history for this decision-making process. I do remember there was a long, belaborous conversation regarding it due to like wanting to have I don't remember. I'd have to dig it up. We should really write this stuff down after we make the decision. It's been too long. Alexander, do you remember the motivation for wanting to do that?
So right now I saw that the default value in the config is basically 1.10 plus 1, which is like the previous version, the minor version plus 1. For some particular reason.
That should have been updated for the last cycle. If it wasn't updated for 1.11, it should be updated.
Yeah, so right now I'm suggesting to Peter to basically use the version from the binary, because kubeadm version prints this same version.
Yes.
And I think that we should use the same by default for the config and everything. And this is going to solve the offline problems as well. And also, if we're using like kubeadm 111.1, and if you decide to pull images, it's going to pull the exact same image versions, which I think is not a big problem here. Instead of the latest, I mean.
That's Peter's PR that he came back to.
Yeah.
No, I think that's totally fine for that. For the there was a couple different conflating things with his PR. There's a couple different issues. He's kind of trying to swipe across them with one PR.
Yeah, I'm going to talk to him later. I posted a comment earlier today.
Yeah, and that CLI conversation actually cuts across both Ross's PR and Peter's PR. So there's a general problem of defaults, config, CLI args, and consistency.
Yeah, you can talk about. I think you mentioned David. So Ross, in the meantime, can inspect like Viper. He promised to do it. Mm-hmm. And if we decide to go with Viper, I mean, we can trailblaze.
Yep. Tim is around now. Did you want to have the conversation real quick, Chuck, with regards to the...
Yeah, so just to catch you up, Tim, we were just talking about the release process and how we have had a couple of issues come in where we added some dependencies to kubeadm, and older versions like 1.8, 1.9 are being built with those dependencies because we're using the master branch, the release repo. And so we were wondering like where the status of Bazel is, I guess, if you had any updates on that.
Yeah, as best I can tell, this is ownerless at the moment. So I think that this stuff is done sort of magically behind the curtain of Google, and from the release team perspective, on any given release, we focused on test infra because we were focused on the current release, actual build and release mechanism and how we're managing the lifecycle on an ongoing basis. And the older ones, all of that has just sort of magically happen. So I think this is really highlighting the fact that we need to figure it out and figure out how to pull more of it from behind that curtain and get some transparency. And there's the one issue logged, and people sort of realized, like, based on the bugs and the symptoms, and then people went and looked, and yeah, this is just building on the branch. And there was, or not on the branch, but just off a master. People then from Google said they would look at it, but issue not taken ownership of, and it's ambiguous. So the other gap here, I think, is that we haven't had enough volunteer base and contributor base within release broadly that has been the release team, which is time boxed and focused on the current release. So this is something that I've been trying to bring up at the SIG release and also a bit at SIG PM, because we need to figure out how to get more visibility and contribution in the space. So yep, it's a mess, and I guess that's not exactly an update. It's just affirmation. It's still where you thought.
Yeah, that's totally fine. So is there any issues? Well, actually, I should click on the issue that you logged, but is there any issue about moving to Bazel? Do we have any, is there any documentation around what is required to get that process going?
I heard some discussion, I think, on Slack about trying to unify things and get rid of the duplication, but I haven't seen anything written down.
Okay.
I know Jeff or Ixty was the main driver for trying to get this, and he knew the most about the current state and the issues that were there. Ideally, I would love to deprecate the release repository.
Nothing else. I'm going to be at BazelCon in New York in October, and I will corner everybody that I can there.
Nice.
In terms of releases, so this is a sensitive topic. Has the SIG considered, like, in terms of the kubeadm deployment to users, at least, and also in regard to deploying the other binaries, have you considered using like a unified package manager instead of deps RPMs?
We talked about it a while ago. It's been, again, one of those things where no one pulled the trigger because no one wants. It's one of those things we said, like, wouldn't it be nice if, and no one's was there to follow through. So we've been continuing on with a legacy because it works, kind of, and there hasn't been a push from the community to make this go.
I think from a maintenance perspective, you need somebody to go ahead and build it and show it and stand behind it enough to show that it is viable versus the idea.
I do know that, like, for a long time, people were maintaining their own meta container, and I talked about it within the SIG for a long time too, of wanting to get out of the business of actual packaging itself, and to have like the meta container that does the installation process. But that, again, not enough resources or time or volunteers to make that happen.
I posted a comment in one of the related issues. I need to dig it up. Basically, my second suggestion here was basically that instead of meta containers, like the Go binaries by themselves are portable across different distros. So in a way, you don't need a container as long as you pretty much have some sort of an install script. Like the Go programming language binaries are already portable to everything as long as you download the file from the internet.
I think that's the problem is UX and expectations around UX, right? Like when a person is on a given distro, they're very comfortable with having a repository set up and a processes in place for pulling these things and using those things. We even talked about this in the very beginnings of kubeadm, and the choice was made to add the native packaging because of the issues with UX adoption for consumers. Now, containers have been around a couple of years now, and folks are a lot more comfortable with them. it's possible that we could revisit this conversation. You know, and Go's been around for a couple more years now, and people are more comfortable with it. So,
as far as building Go binaries, we did try that with cry tools in kubeadm, and it was one of the pre-flight checks that failed and said, use Go get to install cry tools, and we got a lot of feedback, a surprising amount of feedback actually, that was saying people don't want to install the Go tool chain to install a dependency or install a binary.
Yeah, I guess my point here is that since the cry tools binaries, my assumption is that they are basically portable across different distros. If you copy paste them to different distros, you don't have like dependencies somewhere under the OS that break this. So the binaries are portable, and you can use something like curl essentially to download the binaries you want. That's like the most portable approach. You don't depend. Yeah.
The binaries that we currently ship in RPMs and devs right now, are they sourced from the Provenance OS, like the matching one? Because I know that in Go's history, the Go toolchain that we've shipped on different operating systems has had patches that support OS differences.
Oh no, they are not. They are built against like meta containers that are crufty and old, and then the binaries are sometimes not matching the distro at all in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, it's pretty common in my experience that distros ship a Go that's patched with a few things specific to, if nothing else, their config layout. And then binaries generated on those are often not portable.
So if you go to the website of the Go programming language, you can download the binaries. And are there separate binaries for Fedora and Ubuntu there?
Yeah, distro providers have other constraints too. Like, you know, you can't ship. You're not supposed to ship packages that have like elliptic curve cryptography and stuff inside of it, but you know the binaries are up on the web, so but whatever.
Yeah, maybe we should still go away from the packaging itself of the distros and like provide some sort of other way of deploying.
I think a script with a container is, I've always kind of argued for that. Like a single container is a hermetically sealed thing, that an artifact that we can publish. Then a script with inside of that container could do all the installation process that we would need.
Sorry, just to clarify, because I haven't been listening completely. We're talking about shipping a kubeadm container?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, that's my argument for a long time, of having like, you can bundle everything into a kubeadm specific container, and then depending upon the distro, you might do some minor changes, but it could just have a script which is like, you know, run the kubeadm install container, run the install script for kubeadm, and maybe that install script is defaulted for, you know, the container itself.
I think that since Docker or some container runtime, I mean, that's the trouble, is some container runtimes don't have a great interface, but I guess that's probably not our fault for users to be consuming them directly. But in the case of Docker, like, which is going to be the 90+% of people, like, it's so simple to run a container at a specific tag and get it from somewhere. And the trouble that we've had with this is, you mentioned earlier that like there's been previous out of tree efforts to ship a supported script for doing all of the mounts and supporting mounts on different operating systems. So like CoreOS is kind of problematic. I think if we want to spend energy on this, it's a good way to package it, but there are definitely, like, people have tried this path before, and we're going to need to be prepared to solve those problems.
We need to own it, right? Like, no, the status quo is not maintainable, really, but at the same time, like, we need to, like, at some point in time, own this space for the delivery of the artifacts. We've kind of punted this off in perpetuity. Perhaps we can start to rally on a single idea instead of one, and then, you know, talk about the meta problem in an issue. Like these are the set of issues that we have with it, and we would like to be able to control our own destiny, yada yada yada. Then talk about proposed solutions. We could talk about either generic packaging systems that do spin off things for multiple different distros. Talk about a meta container and other options, and then we can just try to churn on this topic over time to approach consistency. We've done that with a number of other topics. I think having the issue logged with all the gory details so we can go back to it over time is important. Perhaps we could start there and then try to, if we have a checklist for some of these things, once we make a decision, we can start to eventually whittle away at it.
Yeah, at some point we could graduate to like a packaging KEP, and then this might be something that would be useful for other binary distributors from other SIGs to kind of follow pattern. I mean, and for things that are SIG ships, like the cluster API stuff.
So, Chuck, do you want to write up an issue for this stuff and try to sort of rally folks around it and just keep on jabbing us in the eye to try and make progress?
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Yeah, I think some eye jabbing is probably about where we are needing to be on it.
Are there other topics?
I wanted to say something about like the snap packaging. I saw these two micro-K8s. I'm not sure if anyone has seen it. It's like a deployment of Kubernetes with a snap package. It was kind of fascinating how easy it is to set up a cluster with it. It executes in the lines of micro-K8s.kubectl. Basically, you have like exposure to all the commands that are bundled in the package. And it was kind of nice as well, but I'm not sure what the state is between like snaps, flatpak, and all the different flavors of containers and stuff.
Yeah, I think we should rally on the issue because there's many different incantations of how people do packaging.
Yeah, and I mean, really, it's not a differentiated problem, right? Like you're building a Go binary, I'm building a Go binary. Let's all kind of try to do it a similar way.
All right, I think the horse is sufficiently beaten here. We can rally on the issue, and then I do think we should continue to talk about it as part of next meetings. I would like to get consensus on this topic because like topics such as this have a tendency to span release cycles because they're so, I don't know, opinionated, thorny, and there's many aspects to it. And so long as we start to track the history, I think it will help us to make a decision and stick with it and go back and justify our ideas. And eventually, if we have a KEP for it, even better, right?
Yeah, eventually a KEP is gonna like collect more attention.
Yep. All right. There's no other topics listed here. Are there any other topics for anybody else? Or do we get 15 minutes back?
So it seems like we definitely want to do this control plane versus master naming. I'm glad to see that personally. I think Chuck also expressed some vocality about that. We have docs that have gone through the approval process, the KEP process that have master everywhere. This would be confusing to search for in the future. We should also like retitle the PRs. Are we allowed to just like go in there and just say like, hey, actually the SIG doesn't want to call it this, like let's rename everything? Or do we have to like KEP for that or what?
No, just PR it. PR to the KEP.
Okay.
And just poke me and I can approve it post haste. And Fabrizio's PR, we both commented on it too, and it's not merged yet. So
cool. Okay.
I will fix the naming in the PR and in the KEP in 1 or 2 days.
Okay, perfect.
Cool. Fabrizio, could you just make sure to retitle the PR too, so it's easy to search for?
Yes.
Cool. Thanks.
Are there other topics? Going once, twice, 3 times. All right. Thanks, everybody.